Visual effects in video games are probably what I like the most. All the explosions, the smoke, the lighting, the spells, everything make video games so magical. They highlight what is happening around you during the gameplay, and technically they involve many different areas a game developer can encounter during the process. In this video we will dive deeper into the world of VFX and recreate an awesome spell from Baldur's Gate 3. Visual effects are not only meant to decorate our video games. Of course, they are also used to make gameplay catchy and interesting, but they actually tell us a story. What is the true power of this spell? Is the power coming from within the caster, or is it being gathered from the world around them? Is this spell meant to damage target, or is it designed to heal? Well, you might not have this concept very clear in your mind, but if you played any game, you've already been exposed to it. And if you think about it, it's already clear to you what a VFX is trying to communicate. It's also important to remember that we are talking about video games here, so every effect takes place in real time. That means as VFX artists you also have to find a way for your effects to work and work efficiently. There is no specific recipe for creating a VFX, but there are well-known principles, well listed by the League of Legends team in their guide, that you can use as a guideline when you are trying to design a VFX and you want to keep it coherent with the world built for your game. You will often hear about these principles when talking with a VFX artist or watching any kind of technical talk about VFX. And I think they are extremely useful to keep in mind as a foundation. The first lesson I learned, and one you can easily get from any VFX artist out there, is that the gameplay comes first. Your effect is meant to be an addition to the gameplay, it has a story and explains the situation to the player. But it has to take the current gameplay into account. To maintain consistency, there are those principles: shapes, contrast, color, and timing. Everything we represent on the screen is made with shapes, and they are the most immediate way to express a concept. Is this something harmful? Should we use a soft or a more hard shapes to represent that? Where is the threatening area of this spell? Am I safe in this position? All these questions can be solved using the correct shape to communicate with the player. Contrast is the tool you usually use to communicate the power or importance of a VFX. Low contrast can indicate something weaker, while if you want to immediately grab the player's attention, high contrast is recommended, and instantly gives the idea of something not to ignore. Color also plays a big part in this. It can give a player a very quick idea of what's going on. Colors can be used with many meanings, like communicating the nature of a spell or the origin of the effect. Remember the thing about telling a story? Well, color is super helpful for this as well. Just by changing the color palette of a VFX, you can give a glimpse of what kind of spell we are talking about. And then there's timing. Timing for me is the most difficult thing to handle. Moving something by just a few frames can lead to a very different result. It's tricky. The concept is very similar to what happened in animation. You have to balance the phases of the VFX, have an anticipation to prepare the main stage, and build up what is about to happen. Then the main part can take place, and finally there will be an outro. You want to keep everything as dynamic as possible and stress the tension in particular moments of the effects. For example, using easing to handle the timing. Now, I've just scratched the surface of the theory behind VFX. This world is incredibly vast and there are a lot of other topics I didn't even mention. But today I want to give you a practical example of how a real VFX is created in a game engine, and talk about the variety of tools and programs a VFX artist needs to master. To do that, we recreate the whole person spell from Baldur's Gate 3. There are two main reasons why I chose this effect. First, I'm a huge fan of it. I was hooked from the very first moment I saw this spell in the game. In my opinion, it's really well done. The second reason is that this effect is complex. It combines very different techniques and gives you a real idea of how deep this world is. The Hold Person spell is designed to paralyze the target, locking them in place with chains of magic that seems to pull from the fabric of the reality itself, summoned by the caster. This spell is made up of two different VFX. The first one takes place on the caster's hands, while the other affects the target of the spell. By analyzing them deeply, we will understand that they are actually many different effects layered together. And that's the first thing we have to remember. VFX are usually layered in many parts. In this case, they share similar elements, but let's treat them separately. The first one starts with a big flash at the center and a distortion bubble that wraps around it. As time passes, it grows and shows chaotic lines spreading outward, along with another ring of energy and an inner flash. Moving forward in time, we can also notice something that isn't immediately clear at the beginning. A dark area is applied as background, and it really helps the contrast of the effect. Let's start with this one. The black area is just a billboard with round texture that grows over time. Its behavior is controlled with a particle system. VFX are usually strongly based on particle systems. They are a key concept to understand, and you are probably already encountered them. But sometimes they are used to achieve something a bit unexpected. A particle system is essentially an emitter that can produce elements. It has different modules that allow you to control the behavior and appearance of those elements. In this case, we are using it to emit a single particle that simply grows and fades at the beginning and the end of the effect. The same concept with a different timing is applied to the ring of energy and the inner flash. The initial flash is a billboard as well, but its texture scrolls outward. And it's not just a normal scroll, it also uses polar coordinate to map the texture around the center. We achieve that using a custom shader for our particle. The chaotic lines are custom meshes that we created in Blender. They are flat and already distorted, and we use the same shader to scroll the texture over time. The particle system also controls their rotation and scale. The last thing that remains to handle is the distortion around the maze end. This is again a billboard, but it's able to distort the background using another shader. We can adjust the camera's color buffer and sample it using UV coordinates. If we modify the input UV, we get the desired distortion. In this case, the shader exposes a texture to use as an offset of the final UV in order to achieve whatever shape we want. All the elements are completed and we can pile the layers, adjusting the timing for each one. In Unity, you usually group them under a common parent, which can also be a particle system with all its modules disabled. You then use the start delay of each element to control the timing. There is actually a better way to do this, but we will cover that later. Let's move on to the second part of the spell. We can immediately notice that the dark area is used again as a background, and there is a distortion ring that enlarges at the bottom of the enemy. Then there is a flash with a narrow and flat shape, some stretched particles, a sort of dark nebula, and rays of light expanding from the center. This is just the beginning of the second VFX. There is also a group of tiny particles that moves in a chaotic way toward the caster. Additionally, there are a series of elements that take place on the ground. Around the target, the flat figures of the chain and the glyph of the spell appear with a sort of flash that goes up vertically. In the end, there is a big solid chain that surrounds the enemy and moves around it. Many of the mentioned effects are created using the same concept you already encountered while recreating the first part. So let's focus on the others. The group of tiny particles can be tricky. You might think they are just real-time particles guided by the particle system itself, but we have to remember the context. This effect runs in real time, so we cannot overload it with a large number of particles and simulate their chaotic trajectory directly. In such cases, what we can do is simulate the group of particles in an external software like Houdini, Blender, or something similar. Break them into an Alembic or a VAT format and reproduce them with an animation when we need it. In this case, I also animated the color of the shader, and as you can see, the effect is pretty convincing. Leaning on the ground, we find the chain and the glyphs of the spell. They are created in the same way, using two different pieces to achieve the effect. The first is a decal, which we can identify because the shape appears projected onto the ground, even when the surface isn't completely flat. The second is a mesh, partially transparent, used for the vertical rays. Unity doesn't directly support decals emitted by the particle system. They have their own independent implementation. However, we needed to control them using the particle system, so what we did was create a custom shader to simulate a projector. To achieve this, we reconstructed the world position of the object with the help of the depth texture. We then converted this into the decal's object space. This allowed us to use the result as UV coordinate for our projected texture. Our shader can also rotate the texture over time, enabling us to achieve the same effect as the spell. The vertical flash was easier. It's just a mesh obtained by extruding the texture shape in Blender. The colors face vertically according to the depth of the scene. Once again, we rotated the texture to achieve the same result. The big chain that surrounds the enemy is of course a mesh. It has this soft animation which we can achieve by manipulating its vertex position through a vertex shader. We only need to add a vertical offset to the world position before converting it to the local position. In many cases like this one, we want to synchronize what our shader does with something else happening, or simply let the particle system direct the animation. We can control some parameters using the custom attributes of the particle system, and from the shader we can adjust those values using the UV channels. If we analyze the hold person spell again, we can notice that what we learned about the timing is really well applied. In particular, what lays on the ground has an interface, a sort of main loop, and eventually disappears. It's not exactly easy to recreate this in Unity. We will need to clone our particle system and play one version as an intro and another version in loop afterward. Before, I mentioned that there is another way to group our layers of the VFX, and that is by using a timeline. This is also super handy for manipulating every track and getting the correct timing. Unfortunately, Unity doesn't support loops in its timelines, so we had to implement it ourselves. The Unity timeline isn't so hard to extend, so we created custom markers that allows us to insert loops. This way, it is now possible to assemble the whole VFX, preserving the loop after the intro phase. For the sake of fidelity, there are other two important touches to add to this VFX. The first one is the camera shake, to announce the moment when the target is hit by the spell. Once again, we wanted something controllable by the particle system, and easy to use during the testing of the VFX. So, this script exposes an animation curve which is evaluated using the time of the particle system. This method also fits our timelines. Another thing is that the caster has some overlays on his and his eyes. In Unity, to implement this, we use the same concept already applied to recreate the decal effect. So, with the help of the depth texture, we now have some elements that we can place over what we want to highlight. We recreated the camera system of the game, the preparation stages of the VFX, and tweaked some details. Merging everything together, here is the final result. As you can notice, the recreation of this effect wasn't easy and required a lot of work. After everything was completed, I had the awesome opportunity to talk with Jessica Lecours from Larian Studios, the VFX artist behind the original effect in Baldur's Gate 3. I asked her a few questions about the process, and maybe you'd be interested in hearing her answers as well. Here is a conversation we had. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. What inspired you to become a VFX artist?
So actually, I think it's mostly the fact that I really liked animation and 3D at the same time. I was actually a 3D artist before, but I switched. I saw like an opportunity of a job for a VFX artist, and I kind of took it. And I saw that actually I really liked it. So this is why I kind of stayed on the VFX side instead.
Okay, okay. And now that you are a VFX artist, would you describe your process? How do you usually approach creating a new VFX?
But our process mostly at Larian is like we're gonna be given a spell. Like, let's say, for example, I'm gonna take it like in the context of like BG3. So what we were mostly being, what we mostly had is like we were giving a spell, and sometimes the spell in the book had like a description of what visually it might look like and such, and we would kind of try to align with that the most of the time. But we also had kind of visual identities for every type of spell or every kind of utilities, I think it's called, or something like that.
Okay.
And we were kind of following that. We had like at some point I made a mood board so we could actually see more correctly like the difference between all the spells and such. So and then we pretty much just like make the VFX depending of like what you need to do. So if you need like an external software or something like that, you might go on a different software to make the part of the VFX that you need. But apart from that, most of it is actually done on our engine.
Okay. So how do you collaborate with the other departments? Are like, I don't know, designer, other artists, developer, like, are they involved in the process?
So in our side, on the VFX side, we're mostly connected with like the designer side. So they're gonna tell us, for example, oh, we're gonna need a status for this spell. This spell is gonna it's gonna cause the person to be hold person, for example, or gonna be burned or something like that. So we have that, for example. Whenever we're working like with spells, we're really connected with this. And they're gonna tell us as well how the spell is connected, what type of spell is it? Like, is it gonna be a projectile? It's gonna be something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So design is the ones that mostly actually like make the whole thing, and we just make the visual on top of it.
Okay.
So
Okay. You're strongly inspired by the design. Say.
yeah, exactly. Because
Okay.
like design is gonna make the code part of it technically,
Okay.
and us we're just attached a visual to it.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. So let's take all the effects you worked on, everything you made. Which one is like, I don't know, your favorite one? Which one is the, yeah, which one are you most proud of?
I think that my favorite one is probably the one with the dragon fight with answer, like in the answer place. I don't remember exactly the name, but there's like a big dragon that is like an electric dragon, and he has that spells that is like a little bit of a something that takes the whole place, and he fires it. He charges it actually, and then after that he fires it, and it's such like a big spell that it was nice to try to balance everything to actually make it like readable and still super nice. So I think it's personally my favorite that I really like to work on.
Okay. Is it also the most challenging one?
Yeah, because it's so big, it has to be like still readable and everything. So yeah, I would say I think it was the most challenging to just balance out everything. It's not even like difficult on the technical side. It was just like on the visual side, trying to make it look nice and everything. Yeah, mostly like the impact side of it. Yeah, it's like it takes the whole arena to the spells is like really big.
Okay. Okay. Um. Okay. I want to ask something that I'm sure everybody is interested in. Do you have any advice for someone just starting out as a VFX artist?
So I think that first of all, it's to not give up.
Okay.
And probably to continue to try to explore different things, to still be like aware of the newest video games and such, and try to maybe like see how they do visually their thing. Maybe even try out some software like Houdini or Imogen, for example, and trying to, because they're the ones that are the most into, they're the most used into like companies and such. So, because Embergen, for example, is one of the newest one and is super like. So, yeah, I would say like to not give up and to continue exploring. It's the best.
Okay. Thank you so much for the time. Everything you shared is very insightful for me. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You're welcome.
After talking with Jessica, I also found out that Larian has a toolkit to create mods for the game, and you can use it to check out the original assets as well. It's an awesome tool if you want to dive into those VFX in detail. Unfortunately for me, I discovered this a bit late, but I still had the chance to check all of my work. I leave some other resources about VFX in the description below, like the awesome VFX apprentice course and the Material Maker tool, which you can use for free to create procedural textures. Recreating this effect was an incredible project for me, and I hope it was interesting for you too. If it was, please consider subscribing. Also, a big thanks to Jessica again for her time and all available insights. Let us know what you think of the project in the comment below, follow us on the other socials, and don't forget to smash the like button. See you next time, cheers!